Okay, hello and welcome to another episode of K6 Office Hours. This time we have two guests for you, so two for the price of one. I am Nicole van der Hoeven.
And I'm Simon Aronsson. And with us today we have Leandro, aka Señor Performo, and we also have Pepe, aka Señor Atún.
Atún. Okay.
No,
I think a lot of people will have a question on that nickname.
Yes. Well, why are you called that? I've just heard it from other people. I haven't heard the explanation from you, Pepe.
Yes, I will tell you Okay, I work in Low Impact K6 team for the last 5 years, and I have been living in Stockholm with the team together, and I like the tuna fish from my hometown, and I usually do a big shipping from my town to everyone in the company. Then they label me as the tuna person.
He's a tuna importer. And what else do you do? What do you do at Load Impact? Or
yes, Load Impact. Now I am working with you, Nicole and Simme, on the DevRel team, marketing team. So now I'm working mostly with content and marketing. Previously, I had been doing front-end in the company. Yes, I helped to build in the previous front-end that we have in the Load Impact Cloud service. And then I switched more to DevRel activity, product. Yes, and here we are now.
Okay, what about this other Spanish speaker? Bienvenido, Leandro. It's your first time on stream as well. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Well, first of all, very happy to be here and that you invited me and gave me an opportunity to come here and share knowledge, do some online rants and have fun. For the ones that do not know me, I am Leandro Melendez, also known as Señor Performo. I am a manager for the performance testing area in Qualitas Group, but as well I have a blog, a very badly attended blog about performance testing topics, which I sadly haven't written much on it in a while. I should get... we're doing many other things, such as well, I'm host of the Perf Bites en Español, the Spanish version of the Perf Bites podcast, as well doing some presentations, online speaking, used to be public speaking. Hopefully that's back to
still public.
In-person speaking, like in front of people, being able to speak with everyone without them being scared only about getting too much performance knowledge. And as well, probably for the ones of you that do not know, I'm also trying this YouTube. I'm trying to become a YouTuber, creating some videos through giving explanations, some examples, silliness, and helping everyone that has performance testing questions, wants to expand their knowledge or improve if we have some veterans. And the challenge there is that I have two channels. Señor Performo, just like that, is in Spanish, and Señor Performo ENG for English, where I replicate and duplicate all the content for our non-Spanish-speaking friends. So that that's why the blog is a little bit unattended lately, but we'll try to juggle everything.
So I'm just frantically putting in the links in the chat.
It's really nice that you actually do the content both in Spanish and in English, especially for me that is trying to learn Spanish. Then I can listen to both videos, and it actually extends my vocabulary.
You can compare. Some of those, beware, I use a lot of slang on both languages, and at times they do not translate. So I have to come up with a different slang joke in Spanish, or some others that in Spanish sound fine, and English sound dirty, or vice versa. So one has to be careful. When I didn't know some of those things, I used to get in lots of trouble. It's a fun saying as an example in Spanish when you get very impressed or scared so much that your pants drop off out of that impression. But in English, that's dirty. So you should not be trying to say that. So you got to be careful when you translate.
Yeah.
And as well, if you want something textual, I think YouTube does some transcripts and translates it for whatever language it detects that you like to speak. So you may have subtitles in some of the Spanish ones. That helps.
There's definitely a lot of like false friends as well between English and Spanish. Like you can't say estoy embarazada. That means totally. That means you're pregnant in Spanish.
Oh yeah, the
Not
false
embarrassed.
cognates do not translate. Yeah, and vice versa from something that sounds well in Spanish or you think translates directly, it's totally the opposite. Very
Yeah.
much. Bizarro is an example. In Spanish, something bizarro is something really elegant and polite. And in English is weird, totally the opposite. So many words that you got to be careful.
Yeah.
And Leandro, sorry, did you run the both initially, like the Spanish and the English, or you started with one and then you decide to go with the other language?
No, from start when I decided to try this YouTuber thing, I was like, yeah, I think I can do this both, and might be easy to just to write both scripts in English and Spanish and just sit there. It's just twice the time that I have to sit there and do the explanation. But yeah, that has been from day one. I thought like, yeah, why not? It cannot be that difficult. If I would have known better, but I'm already in this boat and I will try to keep progressing in both languages.
I respect what you're doing. I have always wanted, I definitely think more content should be created in other languages. It's just really hard to duplicate everything and translate.
Yeah. But it's fun in the end. I can't deny, and hopefully, and I'm gonna pull a plug here shamelessly. For the English-speaking friends, I don't have that many followers yet on that channel. So to make it worth, if you don't mind, for our people, audience, and friends that are watching right now, subscribe, hit the bell button, thumbs up, all those fun YouTube things. It's very appreciated. It's not that the YouTube algorithm is going to push it to everyone in the network, but at least the performers, that would be cool.
Yeah, definitely. And you're actually one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on here today was because I wanted to get your rant, your performance testing versus load testing rant, which I know you love to talk about. But why do you actually want to talk about it a lot? Why is it so important to you?
Well, to start, I think the rant started not only with that difference, even when I was providing load testing services without knowing and calling them performance, just performance. I was having some situations with customers where, how do I explain this to you? And I tried to explain it better. And at one hand, that's how I started. Like I came up with all sorts of crazy examples and analogies to explain to people some of the often complex performance and load testing concepts, to explain them. And with many customers, I ended up repeating that example, one customer after the other after the other. I'm an IT performance consultant, so every few months I'm with a new customer trying to help them and save them from bad performance. And on those journeys, I started to notice that key difference, like, hey, and I'm going to start from there. Have any of you, all with some sort of experience on performance testing, have any of you experienced this situation where you are requested to automate a process for load testing? You haven't even started. You start to manually get acquainted to it, get familiar. You become friends, invite a coffee each other with this process. And then you notice it's slow. You have not scripted it, but it's really slow. Have you found or experienced this situation? Any of you?
Yeah, definitely. It ideally it shouldn't happen, but unfortunately, the reality is it does happen more than it should.
Yeah, and it was happening at least to me, that so much that several projects, when I started to notice that, like, hey, I don't think we should be running this load test with this very bad performer, or one, not only one, but other times where like, hey, everything sucks. Why do you want to do a load test? To know the performance. Well, I can tell you it's bad. And I'll send the bill and say, hey, thank you for receiving this service without automating. And they were expecting lots of automations. So that's where when I started to realize, like, hey, and to go back in the day, I was polished and burned and formed in the load runner environments. So I started to notice, like, why everyone is so interested of us doing that many automations, where for a true load test, you just need to focus on the worst offenders, the ones that most frequently are executed. No. Otherwise, we want to know the performance of the business process. I'm like, why not? Can't you just run it manually? If it happens once a month, why do you want an automation for that? So I started to notice that some conflicting concepts were happening out there. And I started to realize that some organizations were were responsible, quote unquote. I cannot put a finger on any of them, but business practices is like, yeah, I'm going to sell you as many virtual users as possible, and so that you can automate as many processes as possible. And that's performance testing. And I started to realize, probably like over 10 years ago when I started, there were not that many other options. You had to automate something, slam it a little, or just invoke it. And that's the only way that you had to at least document automatically the performance of elements in your application. But not too long after, tools like HP Diagnostics started to come up, good APMs that could provide that information from just manual executions, organic interactions. And I started to wonder, like, from why no one in the functional area catch this, like, this is taking 1 minute to respond. Wasn't anyone bothered about it? They just said, like, yeah, approved, pass, next. And that was the situation. Many were just waiting for the last step of the performance test to tell us everything about the application. So I started to be frustrated and trying to tell every organization, hey, yeah, definitely you need to automate lots of things and slam the system, but when you're sure that each of the pieces is performing well. So you're not performance testing it well before you try to load testing it. No, but that's a performance test. No. Well, yes, but it's not the performance test. So, and I started to talk about this, try to show everyone the difference. Many organizations and management, upper levels, do not understand well, care, or have the time. I mean, management, they must manage stuff, and they don't have time to get into the weeds of what is the different types of performance tests that can be done. And for them, in first-class airplane trips, were told by salespeople, like, yeah, you just need this tool, and that's all that is going to solve your problems. Where nowadays, and especially since the introduction of Agile, good luck trying to figure out performance sprint by sprint with changing things with automations that are only at the front-end level, slamming the system, having time to slam the system. That was not possible. And I started to notice the cracks. And I ended up giving an example that I think some of you may already heard. Performance testing, thinking that through a load test, you will find everything in performance and you don't have to do anything before. You just have to wait until usually a few weeks before release to production and run a big-ass load test and find everything about the performance of your application. It's like building a Formula One car that you are hoping to run in a race. But without testing it, it has no fuel meter, not oil meter, speed meter, anything meter. And you put it together, and right there and there, you just inspected it. The wheels spin, the The wheel also turns the wheels and the direction, everything. Let's test it by running it into a race, 200 miles per hour. And let's see through that test if it has enough oil, if we are reaching good speed, if it's not hitting. And it's ridiculous. Everyone would say, like, why don't you put like a balance and alignment on the tires, put the sensors that will tell you if it has enough oil, fuel, meters, anti-freezing liquids, all the little details and things that you have to do. And even in cars, they already come with that. I mean, the very early models, probably you had to open the hood and put your finger in to see if there was enough fuel and spin that thing to turn it on. But nowadays, we have so many sensors in cars, so many things that you just get to the gear shop and, hey, my car has a problem, I don't know. And the technician is like, I don't know either, but let me get this monitor with this APM for cars, plug it, and get all the readings from the sensors. Oh, it's your, I don't know, the oscillator or whatever Tom Cruise used to save the world in War of the Worlds. Can't remember the name of that thing right now. And it's similar with the systems nowadays. They all, many organizations expect to know how is the performance doing through a big ass load test and slamming the system without having or instrumentation, an APM, monitorings, or anything in their system to tell them the performance. And that counts as performance testing because you're testing, you're verifying, you're validating the metrics, the responses, the reactions of every piece of your system without having, and that's another one where I had a talk not long ago, like yesterday or Wednesday, with a coworker that was saying, yeah, for a load test, you absolutely need a load testing tool. And I'm like, no, you don't. And they were like, what? It's very useful in most of the circumstances to do some load testing through a load testing tool, create some scripts, focus best practices, all that. I have been touching a little bit into focus on the Pareto principle, whatever generates the most load, be efficient, be smart about it, so that you can catch up sprint by sprint, all of those things. But how about you put your load test environment in a blue-green environment near production, and you just send a few users, ask your users, hey, are you willing to be my beta tester? And many are super excited to be in that group. Okay, all of those, let's move the stream, the flow of the river into that system. Few users use it, slam it. I'll have all my monitors, all my tools in there. Again, not all the solutions are practical to be tried to do this type of testing, but it's possible. And many are like, no, automation, slamming, that's it. And that's why I have this rant and this fight against trying to educate as well as organizations, performers, QA people, all the amigos around that have this misconception that performance is at the end, just slamming the system and only through automations. There are a myriad of other capabilities and things that you can and probably should do even before you try to do. And that is something that as well, since day one when I met Pepe long ago, I was like, I'm incredibly excited about K6 because it gives the capability for developers to start thinking about these performance tests, these metrics that even if you don't have that monitor instrumentation, good, I would say, code practices, unit tests, you can use this for the API tier, some of the front-end tiers, and start gathering these metrics included in your pipeline, included not necessarily only big as load tests, but just stress it. Just do some synthetic activity or triggering into your system and start to gather metrics. And tools like K6 that give you this information right away, you can send it back to the pipeline so that it keeps flowing and you have those gateways, those things that are more efficient than waiting till the very last day just before you're going to release the product to do this big, wide load test to find out that 3 processes from the developer's machine were not caught, that they were taking a lot of CPU cycles, a lot of time doing, 30,000 database connections to populate a small table, like little things that you can catch up with right practices. And this is another one. Not only I would like the world living life in peace, like John Lennon said, in performance peace, holding hands together and taking care of the performance, not only thinking of it as testing. I am trying to push as well this concept of performance assurance. We have quality assurance. Why not performance assurance, which covers all these little practices, which are not, again, just automating and slamming the system until you bring it down to its knees, but making sure that on every previous step, again with the car, when you are putting it together, that before you even mount the tire, that it's balanced, that it's aligned, that has air that won't explode or have any issues, that the rim is perfectly fine before you include it. And that also includes that you can stress test the tire. There are devices where you just put the tire on itself, spin it a lot to see if it's balanced, if it's not, doesn't start to wiggle. Until then, you did a stress test just on the tire. And that's another one that many organizations do not understand. You can just stress test the pieces on themselves a little bit. You don't have to go crazy and try to spin it like 500 miles per hour, kilometers per hour. I'm getting used too much to US metrics, but that's more or less my rant, my fight, and where I want to help the world.
I think that there's a comment here that I want to highlight from James Leatherman in chat. He said that he typically starts with an APM install and then he does the performance fixes on low-hanging fruit. So I think this is a great example of what you're saying, Leandro, that not everything to do with performance is like, not all of those insights or all of those improvements are done by running a load test. Because this is something that I think should actually happen before you run a load test. Because if you don't have your application servers instrumented at all, then it's going to be really hard to tell when something does happen during your load test, why that happened, right?
Yeah, and there are so many. The phrase I like it, the low-hanging fruit, generally is the easiest, cheapest, and yummiest that you will get because it's almost ripe. It's down there, ready to be picked up. Which it's right. Whenever you start to do this, the earliest is cheapest, fastest. The benefits are you get more impact, and you get to catch and fix so many problems that are the ones that are the most difficult, like following this example. I'm gonna steal it completely. When you are trying to catch up only on front end, on load tests, it's like you're trying to get the fruit that is at the top of the tree, the very, very top. Probably it's not ripe. Probably the benefit will be small. It will cost you a lot of effort, time, money, and putting an APM. And I sometimes recommend put your APM in your dev environment. That's the very first step. If you can catch metrics even from the developer's machine, like just before they check in the code, I have something that grabs metrics, and with those metrics I can do, is it performing well? Is it good to keep moving? Or has metrics from constant performance tests. We call it more or less heartbeat, that you can constantly keep gathering how it is behaving and say, hey, whoa, whatever you change now, instead of half a second takes 50 seconds. Hell no, you won't pass. And apply a Gandalf and stop and bear. You shall not pass. So that's super important. I totally agree.
So let's actually ask a developer here, Pepe. What do you think of what Leandro is saying about some things that you can do to improve application performance during development?
I wanted to ask Leandro, what are the challenges that he finds with developers to learn about performance testing? I am somehow too biased because I have been a developer in a performance testing company. So I knew I was just surrounded by people who knew about performance testing. I could apply my mental model, what I know as a developer, but I wanted to know that Leandro had been working with QA, a lot of QA, but now that this performance testing is shifting to the developer, what do you think that the developer need to learn about performance testing? We have been discussing many times about our documentation, how we could have better documentation for people who come new to performance testing. So,
well, yeah, that's a very good question, and I think I can fill up. In my past life, I was a developer. So before I got sucked up into the performance world, I was creating code. And I think one problem that many developers face is the churn, the stress, the hurry to produce. And first, and I having been in both sides of the battleground, to call it in a way, I hate it that it's called the battleground. I really don't like that it's this war against in between the testers against developers and vice versa. Because as well, and I have been there, and that's why I think I can empathize better. The poor developer is just trying to push something that works, trying to fulfill the requirement and trying to deliver. I think a element where you can start to spread it over the developers when it's a company that is just trying to push software, doesn't work on a performance testing tool, like you say here. It's creating requirements that include performance metrics for them to complete it, to mark it as complete. And many organizations, I think that this education goes way before the developers, where many product owners, requirement gatherers do not have any idea that they have to take into account performance metrics and things as simple as starting as a response time. It should not take too long for your process. Google has this Rail, I think it's the standards that they present at times. Sometimes they're a bit extreme, but
Lighthouse?
You can come up with these standards.
You mean the Lighthouse metrics?
I think it's they call it Rail. It's an acronym for. I'll have it as homework and send it later. I can't remember, but there are some standards for respecting this performance. But there are some other things that you should include, like to not consume too many CPU cycles, the RAM, to not to become a RAM hog, to manage well the memory, as an example. And this is something that at times we figure out until we do an endurance test, that it releases the RAM correctly, that it's not holding in. Many programming languages nowadays do not let you commit this programmer sin that used to be very popular, but you do not destroy the object, do not dispose it, and it stays there in the memory forever and ever until the resuscitation of the server. So, and that's one element. Give the developers this knowledge that they should be mindful of what they are creating, that it needs to perform in general. And the other one is, on some other companies, I have this experience from Visual Studio. Remember, Visual Studio has the diagnostics component tool at a corner when you're running something. I fell in love when they included that right when you're running and debugging something, there you have your CPU line, your RAM line, and a detailed view of what is consuming time. Even at a line of code, you can go really, really deep and say, like, just this line of code is taking 0.0003 seconds, perfectly fine. The next one is taking 10 times that. In regular world, you might say like 0.1 seconds. Well, that's no problem. Yeah, but that thing is going to happen 1,000 times in your process. Oh, then you add them up. So you can start to instruct them and let them use some of their SDKs, have some of these functionalities. I know that some platforms for Java include similar tool sets. And the other one is to help them, and this, I think, goes hand in hand with unit testing. Some of the ways that, as an example, K6 can be leveraged, to me, is very similar to doing unit testing. You are just invoking this, making sure not what is the functional output, but the performance metrics to get a pass and fail. And many, as an example, K6, the language is very understandable and exportable to what many developers are doing. But this will depend as well on what is the language that the developers are using. And sometimes you have to be mindful of that. If they are, I don't know, their software is being developed in COBOL, you cannot ask them like, hey, here's this automation tool written in, I don't know, C+++, and go on automating it. And they're like, I had to learn this new language.
Or worse, a UI, right?
Yeah, and well, that's a whole other topic. People getting used to just one UI, and in my head, and that's another one. A true developer is the one that here's a text editor, start developing, and most of the time that should be right. When you are working with graphic interfaces is when you have to integrate a little bit better, but in general, you have to be mindful of what you are asking for them and what their knowledge, and not to push them, strain them too much. And one thing about K6 tool is the language. It's pretty much everyone has had some exposure to it. I think of few developers that would say like, what is that language? And if not, it's very easy to pick up for someone with object-oriented programming experience in Black. And from there, you can instruct them like, hey, I need you to, and that's something that I'm starting to request at places that we're working on. Hey, amigo developer, can you, together with any new piece of code that you create a unit test or something like a K6 request that will test your code? It's like you should not be pushing things that are not paired up with a way of testing it, a way of measuring it. And that's a saying that I think I heard Google came up with it. Any software that you cannot automate and test on is broken. So everything that you create, you should be mindful to pair it up with, or holds to request, some ways to invoke it. Do not make it like, and this used to be a headache for other past performance and load testing practices, when you had applications that were already compiled, sealed up, and good luck trying to reverse engineer them and stimulate them to do a load test. That should not be the case. Anything that you produce should have, and I like to call it like the Konami code. I don't know if I'm aging myself with this, but it was, if you don't know, video game cheat codes came up to help testers test the game, because otherwise I have to test the last level. I'm not good enough, and I have to make it up to the last level so that I can test it. So they came up with these cheat codes. Enable those type of cheat codes, feature toggles. There are multiple tricks to ease your life as an automator, as a developer that has to comply with the requirement for you to check in and move and get your post-it markers done and move it to your Kanban board. So I think some of those are the comments I would do about developers. They are not the enemy. They are not evil, or we are not either testers. So let's try to help each other and produce something with quality, and vice versa. At times it's like, hey, developer, I think I see something in your code. Can we? And that was, I believe, a principle with XP, like 4 chicks in a seat working on the same code, and like, hey, I think you can do this better here. In this, that I can switch my hat, and now I'm a tester again, and now I can go back to coder, and everyone should be cooperating. How do you expect me to know about testing? And like, well, I can tell you, I can show you, I can hold my hand. Come on. Well, now let me get some Purell on my hand and then hold it, and let's get together. But those are more or less what I think should be some guidelines for developers to be able to start to tackle performance. Give them tools that are understandable, easy and give them the concepts and culture to start to respect performance in the application.
So, Simme, what was your
really
experience coming in? Oh, sorry, I was just going to ask you. What was your experience coming into K6?
Well, I didn't have any prior, formal performance testing background. Although I've been working in a lot of agile teams and leading a lot of agile teams where we've tried to incorporate performance testing into our everyday testing, not with any particular tools really, because that's one thing that I think Leandro really makes a good point about, that a lot of the performance issues that you have in an application, those could be caught already at the unit testing stage. You already know, for instance, that if you have a map of items and you want to iterate through that, and then you want to iterate through it again and again, then you can, just by looking at the code, understand that this will not be performant. You can choose a better suited algorithm to make this faster, right? So one of the things that I know that people have been really saying against performance testing using unit tests is that you are not on a performance environment or a performant environment. You're not in production, right? So the servers are worse. Your MacBook, for instance, will start to try to hover if you try to make it go as fast as you would on a regular server. But I don't think that's really a legitimate reason not to do it, because you can always benchmark against your previous result, right? So,
well, I would add up on that benchmarking from one environment to each other is like there's a problem in mathematics when you have too many variables to calculate that it becomes virtually impossible, and you have to do several permutations. It's common in billiards or pool games where to predict exactly where a ball is going to end is complicated at an extreme, and it's very similar. You have multiple variables in a smaller environment, extrapolating it to a larger one. It's not that the RAM extrapolates linearly.
Yeah.
And you add the other component of another CPU network card. What I would say there, and for everyone that says, I cannot do performance testing on a test environment, dev environment, smaller environment, I always reply, you cannot do capacity testing, find out the true limits of production. But if your test environment is smaller, and I'm going to go, I use a lot this car example because everyone can relate. This Formula One car, if you have to test it in a Walmart parking lot instead of the racing track, it's okay. You will find out that probably the tires are flat, that it cannot go, and you wouldn't try to push it up to 300 miles per hour in a parking lot in a Walmart. But you can start to see what is the behavior when you are trying to do, and I would say that applies only when you're trying to do capacity planning or testing, is when you need a full similar to production environment or in production. But other than that, all the other environments are super useful to catch these little details that can start to fail. And in a test environment, if you already see that 10 users running the same process are clogging the system, okay, we have an issue. We need to start to polish it. And when you move it to production, even larger, even better, it will behave or be able to take even bigger loads. But that's
I think that's
bad
what
excuse
Simme
for not
was
to do.
saying as well, right?
That's my exact point as well. That I think James actually summarizes it really good, that deltas are really the only stable metric in a way.
Mm-hmm.
If you already know that with one user, a certain interaction takes 2 seconds on your laptop, there's no reason to really expect that it will run super fast in a production environment with 100 or 1,000 users. So you should probably fix that before you even start thinking about a load test.
And that brings us to another misconception. It's slow because it's a test environment. Don't worry, we'll throw at it resources later in production, so it'll get better. No, probably it won't. And if it does, it will be expensive, super expensive. So beware. Those type of misconceptions are the ones that I'm fighting to clear up in the world. But
I really
very
love
good examples.
I really love that in K6 there are a lot of developers like Simme and Pepe, although Pepe doesn't like development anymore. But Simme as well, they're both very concerned about performance because it should be like a team effort, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, all the team should be involved, and that's where I am trying to push. It's a little bit of more education, even for the customer, the product owner, the scrum master. Like, hey, when they ask, like, hey, are we taking care into performance? What they are truly think is, are we slamming the system with automations because they don't understand the true background, and or they were forged in the old days where that was the only solution. Arguably, because even in waterfall, I would still implement metrics and gates in every step. Like, hey, we are just creating the design of the system. First phase, the system won't be ready until 6, 7, 8 months later in the future. But now we are already thinking on what are the performance issues that we should be aware of, mindful. But for what? Don't worry, we'll wait a week before release into production to think about that. And that's when the problems happen.
And talking about performance testing, including other things than just load testing, Pepe was a front end developer, and I think that front end performance doesn't get nearly the same amount of interest as back end performance. But you really need both, don't you
Yeah.
think, Pepe?
Yes. When I was working in front end, front end performance was not also the first. I think with testing have always priorities, like what we are going to be testing. And this is the problem that we are talking also here about performance testing. You could be testing, or where do I start with my testing? Sometimes you need also the buy-in about, okay, we are going to be testing that part. Testing in our case, I did a few performance testing in the browser, but I was most focused in the unit testing part. Mainly was at that moment because we were a small team or on the front end part. And I guess this is also the challenge that we are talking here now. Who is gonna test? Do we have a good environment for testing? I think all these combination of things make sometimes harder to do performance testing. It's not that people don't want to do performance testing. It's sometimes like, okay, we need a local environment, we need a pre-production environment. Who is gonna be doing the performance testing? Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that a lot of times I just did a talk where I was talking about load testing in particular, and then I talked about performance testing, and the person I was talking to said, "Oh yeah, we want to do performance testing, but we don't have an environment for that amount of load." And I was like, wait, there's a lot that is in performance testing that doesn't involve that. And actually, even if you use a load testing tool, that still doesn't mean that you have to do load testing, right? Because I think that not enough is said about just the small little tests of a handful of users that just run continuously or as part of a CI/CD pipeline. Those tests are important too, just like load tests are. But there's, I think, still an assumption that if you're doing performance, oh, you must be running a 10,000 user load test.
I
And I
like
mean, a
that.
lot of the time, you also want to think that if you want to test a client or a front end, then you will probably mock away the API, right? So you will test in isolation the front end, at least to start with. And if you do that, then what is it that you need in terms of concurrency? You only need one user because it's their
Yeah.
client that will be doing all the work. And they probably will use a computer as the one you're already using, or even worse, probably. Maybe even a cell phone. So you can always start with doing performance tests and thinking about things that I know Marie talked about it a couple of weeks ago when she was on the show. That things like first contentful paint and first use was it meaningful paint, those metrics are really interesting as well. And does not really require any additional tooling or any additional resources at all.
You were going to say something, Pepe?
Yes. Okay. I think for front-end testing, yes, you could be measuring just on the front end, but you also may need some tooling to really identify what are the area. At the end, I think, like with all testing, how much we are gonna be testing is the question, and how much it matters to us. I like what Leandro said about thinking about performance as assurance, thinking about we want to ensure a level of performance and not to be maybe too focused on the low part. I think that is a good concept to start, yes, making the people the point about doing performance testing, because now we could say that most of the many things have at least a pre-production environment in which they could be doing, have a more similar environment, even they could be testing in production. But yes, maybe we are not only thinking about the load, the stress testing part, and more thinking about, okay, you are testing your baseline type of test. We know that this is your level of performance that it will be working under normal circumstances. We could encourage people doing this type of testing, which, as you say, is providing you more than enough value for the common case, and you could always identify if something changed. That at the end is what people want to know.
And in that matter, and as well with UI and front-end testing, that falls a little, as Pepe says, the universe of performance assurance. We have another little guy in that family that has not been paid that much attention, web performance, where there are elements that are totally separated from what is the load testing. And many organizations have it mixed. And when it's a mobile application, so I need 10,000 cell phones to test this. Why? Are you testing the performance of the mobile application or the performance of the server? That's a very separate topic that you shouldn't be like, oh, but what will happen to the front end if the server is slow? Okay, slow it down on one side and then test how it is behaving on itself. It's a waste of resources to try to have billions and billions of cell phones laying around trying to do that. And on that is elements that, as Pepe said, there should be a suite of guidelines or elements that you should be taking care of, like these huge Angular JavaScripts. I have seen them 5-10 megabytes large that for some reason download all the code of the whole application into the client, which becomes super heavy on the client computer and a slam on the network card of the server or the CDN if they have any. So that's another element. They have to be careful that you don't need a Pentium 20 processor with gazillion cores to be able to run the web page. That's why you often have these 2 tabs of Chrome and your computer is dying already. And there are many elements where you don't need too much, you don't need load testing to test the front end. That's one element where, and it should perform, it should not consume. And it's going to become especially true with IoT devices that you need to be careful, or even cell phones, like it's not draining the battery, it's not heating up like crazy. And that's part of the performance. And everybody just like, no, load testing. No, I mean, I can also be checking that my front-end application is not draining the cell phone's battery, consuming all the data of the user. It doesn't matter. Everyone in the world has unlimited data. No, we don't. Here in Mexico, we have like a gig a month at times. And I really dislike those applications that drain all my data. Mm-hmm. And similarly, we need to think of all the performance metrics, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, I call them, that are not drained either by the client, the CPU, the RAM, the disk, and the network. We need to be mindful of them. Other rants that our friends Mark Tomlinson and James Pulley have on that, like those CSS at the bottom of your code. All of us have experienced it, and I have some conspiracy theories, ideas of why this happened. But you start to see the page, it's ugly, and it starts to form, and suddenly, everything is formed, and you get, or those were exactly where you want to click, suddenly appears an ad because it just loaded, and you, I didn't want to click on the ad. Some of those might be on purpose, very good use of those situations with performance. But some others might be like, I wanted the page to load well quickly. Or why would you put a 4K image catalog in your front page? You have like 50 4K images. And some of those things are performance assurance, not only load testing. So we performance engineers need to be mindful, and not only us, again, everyone involved with creating this need to be mindful of what can affect the system or the user experience, because in the end, we don't want to be losing users on our application, or if they are captive, we don't want them to hate it.
So I also wanted to mention, because we only have 10 minutes left, but I did want to talk about Leandro's book. Leandro, are you able to share yet what the title of the book is?
Yeah. The title of the book is going to be The Hitchhiker Guide to a Load Testing Project, where I'm going to be describing with, similar to the examples that you heard today and even more, the steps to go through a traditional, and this is going to be paradoxical that I just slammed load testing all this hour, and my book is about load testing. But inside of load testing, there are also multiple best practices, multiple things that organizations do not understand, such as concurrent users, fighting for data when the data is not renewable, or when they start to create test cases to be automated. Let's use the functional ones. No, the functional ones are clicking everywhere. You don't need to click everywhere. You just need to click on save on your test cases for load testing. How to organize, how to form a realistic load scenario. Some of those things that many even seasoned performers that I know have misconceptions, like why would you just connect all the users when what you care about is the utilization? You want to slam mostly a given service or process, and you're focusing too much on connecting 3,000 users. It's because of the tool vendor told me. And you got to buy a lot of licenses for that, right? So some of those misconceptions that, of course, we want people to make best use of the tools, the resources, what they have, but also to not to over or under do some of those tests. So in the book, I'm trying to explain that. The structure is a little bit like a video game. I divided like levels in, everyone played Mario Bros or any of those platforms levels games, where level 1, it's easy. You get your introduction. You start to get all the tips, what each button does, what each interaction generates. Excuse me, sorry. Hope you cannot hear that noise. The machine just started here.
I was just going to say, though, I've actually read it now, Leandro. I just finished it. And one of the things I like most about it is that it's all metaphors. So it is completely it's really very digestible for a beginner to understand, because he actually has two parts. So first, he introduces a lot of metaphors, and those metaphors are like, how is load testing like planning a wedding, or how is it like assembling an Avengers type crew of superheroes, or the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring in particular. And then he goes into the mumbo jumbo. He actually calls it official mumbo jumbo. So it's like, it's a very, he's walking you through the process in a way that isn't boring. So I really enjoy it.
I am glad to hear that, and hopefully everyone, once they get their hands on it, will enjoy it as well. And as you say, I tried, and now that I think about it, it's very similar to my attempt of translating my content in English and Spanish. I have even a section where I explain this is for Techish speaking language, call it the language Techishian or something like that. And as well, the other translation into not Techishian, where people that are not involved, and I want this to be read by hopefully managers, product owners, or people that are not so involved, even gladly the people who helped on editing and I write like Tarzan, so I had to get some help for that to make it more understandable. And even these people told me, like, now I understand your trade. And it's not a knowledge that I wanted, but I now get it. I understand it. And it's something that got me really happy that I can explain almost every step of a traditional load testing process into something that is digestible and hopefully not that boring and relatable. As Nicole says, all sorts of silly, ridiculous, and even movie and pop culture examples that hopefully everyone will understand and enjoy.
Pepe, I wanted to ask, like, what was the first time you ever heard about performance or a performance issue that you encountered or something like that?
I think first was building our own front end, starting fetching. Mostly on the front end, we were doing unit testing. Unit testing for business logic, but then things starting to got bad performance because most of the case bad queries, fetching a lot of data. Then we started to test this type of performance issues. That was like the first experience in a decent application with a decent number of users starting to struggle. Even yes, backend was robust, well engineered, but there is always cases, performance cases that are starting to pop up after building our first version.
What about you, Simme?
My connection froze a bit, and I also been attending the chat, so I have nothing to add actually.
I think I was just interested in it because I think that when we think about testing in general, I mean, I my introduction to testing was functional testing, and I thought that's all that testing entailed. It's just, does it work? But it's not a question of just does it work. It's more, it's also, does it work under all circumstances? When it doesn't work, what is the experience like? Does it fail gracefully? For how many users does it work? Does it work the same for Leandro in Mexico as it does for me in the Netherlands? I think that performance testing is so broad, and just in the same way that there's more to testing than functional testing, there's also more to performance testing than just load testing.
There's so much more. I can definitely. Yeah, people often are surprised how deep and wide truly the performance testing area is. And it's not because like it's my area and I have to shine it a little. No, it truly is huge, deep, and has several implications that at times some get scared about how much, because at times you have to understand coding, understand networking, storage, infrastructure, many things, agile nowadays, best practices, how to think about implementing all that into this all pieces, crazy moving environment that agile continuous environments are. But it's big, and there are lots of things that you could, should, and probably need to be careful about performance and how to take care of it, assure it. Performance assurance, very important.
And one thing that Leandro has also done is he's also created some videos on SLOs and thresholds and how to implement them in K6. I know in the book, Leandro, you talk about this as 30 minutes or free, and how that expectation really sets the tone for your entire experience with these pizza delivery places that say you get it in 30 minutes, otherwise it's free. Just as a final note, can you talk a little bit more about why it's important to start with that?
Yeah, in the book, and I'm gonna spoilers ahead. Well, as you mentioned, I explained a little bit with the pizza promotion that I used to love when I was a kid. Like, oh my God, it's taking more than 30 minutes. It's going to be free. But at the same time, some people do not want it free. They just want it on time. They're hungry and they are desperate to get that pizza. And that's similar with those time expectations to, and I give some of those examples, to waiting for your girlfriend to get ready, or which is it's very dangerous to be timing and be a little bit annoyed at it, but you need to be mindful of those things. Your girlfriend also has to be like, if you are in a hurry, or any other events where you have a time limitation or requirement or need, and you got to be mindful about it. And it's not the same. A pizza is not going to take the same amount of time as if you order, I don't know, a bruschetta to be prepared from scratch, or just ask for a glass of water in the counter. That's going to take a few seconds, not 30 like the pizza. So there are different things, and that's another error where many people say, like, yeah, all the systems should reply under 5 seconds. Even that month-end process, the balance closure and the final report, the year tax, blah, that cannot take under 5 seconds. We should not do SLAs and SLOs all the same for everything. And there are even processes like, it's worrying that, I don't know, an API request response above half a second. And that's a big example. If it takes that long when we're under load, that might get worse. So everything under 5 or 3 seconds is not a good. We need to be mindful about those as well.
Pepe, Simme, any final thoughts before we close off the stream?
Yeah, I think one thing, I really like the last part, and I would like to talk about it more in some future episode of the office hours. But the sense that things are expected to take different amount of time, that really resonates with me, makes a lot of sense. And I think that also, to a large degree, is dependent on how we design our applications and what kind of expectations we give the users when they are using it. For instance, if everything is designed the exact same way and there are no clear indicators that an operation will take longer or are more complex than another, then maybe everyone will expect everything to be sub 1 second. But you could, for instance, label something as a batch operation or whatever it might be, and even add the explanatory text, setting the expectation for the user that this might take even 5 minutes before it completes. And then most are fine with it, as long as your system isn't locked up while you wait. Yeah, that you're still able to perform other things and you're still able to use the application in other regards than that particular operation. So that would be really interesting to talk about, designing to set the tone for performance expectations. Maybe
a little like those bank applications when you're paying and they tell you, hey, this is going to take a little bit. Please don't refresh or close this window. Otherwise, that's super
then
important.
You never do a retry storm when they tell you that, right? Then
you're like,
you just wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe too long sometimes.
Definitely. But you've been warned. You're okay.
What about you, Pepe?
Yeah, not too much to say, just to say thank you. Hope to see you in person, to all of you, soon.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for coming, Leandro, and thank you to everyone who came to watch us on a Friday. Hope you have a good weekend. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everybody. Adios.
Bye.
Adios.
Thank you.
Adios.
Adios.